Welcome to the first of a series of IFMA webinars based around the COVID-19 crisis. My name is Peter Ankerstjerne. I'm the first vice chair of the IFMA board of directors. I'm also a member of the Workplace Evolutionaries community. And in my day job, I'm the global FM and employee services lead from JLL, which is actually a job I started today. So first experience. Anyway, the idea behind these seminars is to focus on some of the consequences of the pandemic and how we can deal with the situation on a daily basis and get the best out of it, one issue at a time. This is the first of a series of webinars we're doing, and we do have over 1,000 people registered for this. So please bear with us if we are experiencing some technical challenges along the way. The theme for today's webinar is work from home, the new normal. How do we adjust to the new reality of remote working? And over the next 45 minutes, we will discuss strategies, tips, and best practices for maintaining business continuity and how we can best organize work when allowing people to work from home or really to work from anywhere. The COVID-19 crisis has provided a wide scale of work from home experiment where companies have been forced to switch entirely to new working from home practices on a scale that we have never seen before. So just a quick housekeeping before we start the panel. We do plan to limit this webinar to 45 minutes in total. Please send in your questions via the chat functions on the right-hand side in the GoToMeeting panel. You will all be muted for audio quality, and then we will try to do a few polling questions along the way. The webinar will be recorded and it will be available to you via YouTube by tomorrow. We will also do a short summary of the topics that we have discussed, and we will provide links to additional relevant information such as articles, surveys, and presentations. With this, I'd like to introduce the panel. So first up, we have Kate Lister. And Kate is a recognized thought leader and has written several books and dozens of white papers and articles on the topic of workplace, workforce, and other trends that are changing the who, what, when, where, and how we work. She's president of Global Workplace Analytics, a research-based consulting firm that has been helping public and private sector employers understand and implement new ways of working for more than a decade. Kate is a global expert on telecommuting and other flexible workplace trends. Next, we have Dr. Anita Camry. Anita is vice president and co-founder of Iometrics, a workplace services firm that helps organizations succeed with remote work practices and next generation workplace strategies. With a doctorate in organizational psychology, Anita is an expert in workplace survey research and analytics. The firm has developed some of the largest survey databases in corporate real estate to inform data-based planning, workplace modeling, and measuring the human capital impact of workplace design. Both Kate and Anita are part of the Workplace Evolutionaries leadership team and are currently working on WeEase Working from Home survey, which we will talk much more about later on. Last but certainly not least, we had Lucy James. And Lucy is one of the founders and managing director of Large Consulting. Lucy has over 25 years experience in advising organizations on all aspects of FM strategy and delivery, and she is considered one of UK's foremost experts in the field. Lucy is a board member of IFMA UK and is previous deputy chair of the IWFM Association. She's a pioneer in FM and one of the most influential leaders within the sector. Lucy is also founder of Women in FM Network, and she was part of the team that developed the workplace management framework. So with that, I'd like to open the panel with a couple of questions, and I'll start with you, Kate. What do we know about working from home trend before the crisis? Could you bring us up to speed with this?
Sure. Can you move to the next slide? Thanks for doing this morning. It's very timely, obviously. So we've been studying the trend for about 14 years, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of really good data available. The only thing we can rely on in the US and many other countries is the census. And the question it asks is, during the survey week, what was your primary means of transportation to work? And if they said work at home, that was one of the choices, that from that we know they worked at home half-time or more. So currently, that trend has been growing at about 10% over a year, over 10 years, kind of accelerated in the last few years. Next slide. But we did some work with the Bureau of Labor Statistics data a few years ago and calculated that about 56% of the, next slide if you would, 56% of US jobs are compatible with some level of remote work. Repeated studies show that between 80 and 90% of employees want to work from home, not necessarily all the time. 43% Gallup say does it occasionally. So there's an inference there that they are able to. But as I said, a very small part of the population, 3.6%, actually does it half-time or more. We're talking only an employee population here, not self-employed. Next slide. Because you hear wide ranges of numbers, and it just depends on what data they're using. In terms of just how much, things got a little messed up here. In terms of just how much they want to do it, just look here. In terms of millennials, more than student loan reimbursement, tuition reimbursement, about half of the millennials would change jobs for the opportunity. And the other generations are similar, just a little bit lower in numbers to this. So let's look at who offers it. Next slide. And again, depends on who you ask, but according to the Society for Human Resource Management, about 70% of companies offer it. Next slide. But the Bureau of Labor Statistics has a much more limited question. Do you offer it to all or most of your employees? And the answer to that is yes, from about 7% of employers. So I call it the 7% privilege. You know, it's mostly reserved for the older, more senior, more tenured, more trusted, and the higher end of the wage spectrum. So there's a huge gap between who wants to and who does. Next slide. We've calculated over the years that a typical employer can save about $11,000 a year per part-time telecommuter. That's additional productivity, reduced real estate, reduced turnover, continuity of operations, one day of being able to get to work when they otherwise wouldn't be able to. And then the next slide, the fact that people are working at home now, we've calculated, that 56% of people who can are, we've calculated that the country is not losing $30 billion a day. So when people are home and they're not working, you're still paying them their salaries in most cases. You're not getting the productivity of that. So, in some ways, this global work from home experience is one that is saving companies a great deal of money. Now, I'm sure we're not all totally productive at home at this time, but still, it's a very important continuity of operations strategy and strategy for a lot of other things too that we'll be talking about. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Kate. Great insight. And while we're at the topic of what has happened around home working and remote working up until now, the next question is to you, Anita. What happens in terms of productivity when people work from home, especially for those jobs that requires a high level of collaboration?
Yeah, and we've done a lot of research on this and people's productivity when they're working from home, and we've seen a lot of positive impacts. Kate alluded to some of those in terms of, the turnover and the attraction element of it. But we have also looked at when people save a commute, about 60% of that commute time savings goes back to work time. So we see a lot of productivity benefits, productivity improvement in terms of even like in call centers, the call statistics, the turnover, reduced absenteeism, giving back part of their commute. So, and when we compare people who work remotely to people who work primarily in the office, they self-reported, but they feel they collaborate as good or better than the in-office counterparts. So you don't even lose that collaborative element because those folks tend, in the past, right? This is now a new reality, but in the past, you know, readiness and suitability was a factor in people working from home, right? So as Kate was alluding to, you know, the company has, you know, some process or some formality to who's going to be able to do it. So we had people who were good with their tools and who really were very motivated to really understand how you work remotely in a very productive way. So we really haven't seen, when it's done right, you know, we have not seen decrements in productivity, collaboration, even being able to do creative work, which a lot of people always say, hey, you need to be in a team. Well, the concept of using tools to create a virtual team, which a lot of, you know, global organizations deal with this on a day-to-day basis, you know, that can be very, very effective, as effective or more effective. So we are definitely seeing that, you know, when it's done right, it can definitely provide a lot of benefits, you know, to the workforce and then back to the company as well. The issue with the situation today is that this is giving us an unprecedented opportunity to really look at the full scope of different jobs, you know, different kinds of people, you know, working at home, and really understand much more about, you know, what are those, you know, barriers and benefits, you know, as people are doing this at just such an extreme level.
Thanks. And to you, Lucy, I mean, some have called this situation we are in at the moment the world's largest experiment on co-working, and something we weren't really prepared for. But how do you think this experiment would challenge perceptions about collaboration and sort of physical presence and home working?
Well, it's an interesting situation, isn't it? Because for a lot of people, they're trying home working for the first time, and it's not how home working would normally be. Because I mean, when I work from home, and I've been working from home for about 8 years, but I don't normally work from home with everyone else here, and that we're all kind of battling for space. And there are a lot of people having to kind of entertain the kids, queue up for a loo roll and that sort of thing. And so I think the worry would be that it's not a true experiment, because it's a really extreme situation, and that it's a good test of the technology. Lots of people are finding that they're able to do things technologically they weren't before, which is brilliant, isn't it? But I think that the overall situation is not typical, and so it's a bit of a concern that people might find that they think it hasn't worked for them because it's such a kind of strange situation generally. But I think there's a difference as well, I would say, with our international audience here, between perhaps working from home in the States and working from home in Europe, because we don't live in the same kind of space that a lot of people do in other countries. And particularly for those millennials, a lot of people I've spoken to are saying we're finding it really difficult to work from home because we live in a one-bedroom flat, we don't have a table, we don't have an office. I mean, that's 7% privilege. Look at the four of us, we're all sitting in an office doing this video conference. But a lot of millennials do not have a home with an office in where they can video conference. And you can see when you're chatting to people, they're on the sofa, they're in the kitchen, they're standing at the counter, and that is not going to work for them because they can't replicate a professional environment in the place that they live. So that, again, is something that I think might make the experiment a little bit more difficult. Another issue that I think a lot of people are facing at the moment is that they're having a bit of kind of office politics in the home, particularly if they've got kids there, but also if they've got the one good office with the Wi-Fi strength and everything. Who gets to do the video conference? Who gets to mind the baby? Who gets the office? Who gets the kitchen table? And again, those sorts of issues, if you knew you were going to work from home all the time, you would have had time to reorganize your home, get to IKEA and get a desk and that sort of thing. But people have been kind of caught with their pants down a little bit in this situation. And so, I mean, I know I'm sitting at home and I'm on a kind of 40 quid IKEA chair because I don't work from home that often. And I'm going to have a broken back by the end of this.
But it'll be interesting, since we now have an international panel, and obviously, as most people can hear, you're from the UK. It will be good to get Anita's and Kate's perspective on this from the US side of things. Do you see the same things happening in the US, or how is that sort of panning out?
Yeah, I think that's very true, especially that millennial generation. But we obviously have the space here because we work from home a lot. But yeah, it's really variable, and I think it's going to be teasing out that element is. I mean, we're going to allude to the research we're doing later, but we're really trying to tease that out in terms of what is it that people are lacking right now. What do they really need to be productive as they work from home? Because, I think we're going to see, more people doing it after COVID than we're doing it before, even after this back to work scenario. So I think understanding those elements and where that's an issue, because I mean, we don't have anyone from Asia on this panel here, but it's a major issue in the Asian countries. I mean, we see it even more there than in Europe usually. So I think that it's a global issue that goes beyond, just certainly in the U.S.
Yeah, thanks.
Think about the fact that we would normally roll something like this out over 6 months or a year if we're talking to a large company, or even longer. We do the training and we do the office setup, and we talk about and talk through all of those things. And now just plunge, you're there. But one thing looking for the silver lining here, I think that seeing one another's home space and the vulnerability of the children walking through or the dog walking through, I think it's going to make us more human. I think that, we're lacking empathy in the world. And I think that it's going to allow us to be more real. Something like 75% of people say they can't be themselves at work. Geez, I mean, you're the only one you've got. I for one think that, being able to be in one another's home is going to be a positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is it, I mean, could you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I think some of us also see that as a disturbance, having the kid come in and want to play ball in the middle of a telemeeting like this. I mean, but surely there's upsides and downsides to this type of setting.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that you would do in a formal program is you would set core hours. So, you need to be available for the meetings. And so, that you could perhaps limit those life boundaries around that. I spoke to a woman yesterday. She and her husband and 3 children are all at home now. Kids are at school, at home. The 2 of them are working at home, fighting for space, just like you were talking about. And they have signs on their work area. Yes, no, go ask daddy, go ask mommy, wait an hour. I know one woman who wears a tiara when she's home with her small children, and when the tiara's on, you're not allowed to talk to mommy. But when the tiara comes off and she takes it off, every hour or so, you can. I was on a webinar with the chairman of the FCC a few days ago, and he said that, in fact, the web traffic has not increased during working hours, but it's extended beyond working hours. And so I think what we're seeing is more of that work-life blend that, no, you don't work for 8 hours straight. You work, and, if you're home with your children, you spend time with them. It's a different world. I think depending on how long it goes on, we may become accustomed to that world.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think people are moving their working day around a lot. Certainly I'm seeing in my team that we might catch up first thing in the morning, but then there's a lot more happening after their children have gone to bed, and they're doing another kind of stint at that time because they've got to do stuff during the day. And we've always worked a little bit like that anyway, but I'm seeing the clients doing that now as well, actually being a little bit more flexible now they're not in the office. And I think that that's probably going to be something that companies that aren't used to having people working from home will get used to. Because that whole presenteeism, which is a huge issue in the UK, and this whole idea that you should always leave 5 minutes after your boss so that you look like you're really committed. I think a lot of the managers have to get over that hurdle of thinking, is somebody still working if you can't see them? And that means that you have to manage in a different way, because you have to be able to set deliverables and outcomes rather than just look at people and see how busy they look as if they are. And that if you then video conference with them and they're not there and they were out in the park with their kids, that's not necessarily going to impact the work they're going to deliver. And that's, I think, a big step change for the managers and the supervisors, much more than the actual workers themselves.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that
I think,
completely.
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think actually that flexibility, that schedule flexibility is one of the most important things to people, and being able to just have that fluidity with work and non-work and getting what you need to get done, you know, when you need to do it is a major benefit. And again, you know, when we look at how organizations were working before COVID, you have a lot of multinational, you have people working across time zones all the time. So people have been making this work. And I think now just everyone's thrust into it at once, and it kind of brings it to a heightened level. But I mean, it has always been, you know, I think from our standpoint, one of the big elements that attract people to jobs and people to companies is, you know, those organizations that provide that kind of flexibility. It's always been, you know, high on the list for attracting and retaining.
But I think this is an interesting topic, and especially that level of trust that you have to have in your employees, that they actually do the work, even though you may not be able to see them or see them actually doing the work, and you focus more on the outcomes of the work than rather the hours that they put in. That's probably for some companies it's a change of management and leadership style. But there's always that counter side also, that, and I think a lot of us have struggled with that in the past, that you're always on, especially with the mobile phone, right? That you're never able to switch off, and doesn't that home working element to it, especially now with COVID-19, where everybody is at home and everybody is on, does that actually change the setup around mental illness, stress issues, the fact that we're never able to sort of shut off entirely, especially now that work has invaded our home to this level of extent? Yeah,
well, the biggest problem, the biggest issue people have with working from home is overworking. They, you know, without the social cues of people getting up and going to lunch, leaving for the day, you know, the physical part of leaving for the day and leaving it behind is lacking. And there's also the protocols. You know, if you don't have the protocols in place, you know, Peter, if you know you're in Europe and you send me an email, it's 3 a.m. here, you know, I wake up and I see, oh gosh, I didn't answer Peter's email. You know, there's this stress around it. So that's another thing that needs to be sort of formalized, an understanding of when we communicate. But really, you know, managers need to look for that burnout, particularly among people who haven't done this. That you know, look, you're not expected to work 24/7. You know, if they're interspersing work and life, and you know, it extends the day. It turns out that Brigham Young did a study that people who had the ability to work from home were willing to work 47 or 57 hours before they felt overcommitted, before it interrupted with their work and life. The people that worked in the office could only work 37 hours before it interrupted. So, I mean, there is certainly a downside, but there are ways around it. One fellow I know used to get in his car at the end of the day at home, drive around the block and park back in front of his house to sort of say, okay, done with that.
I saw another example on LinkedIn earlier today, and that was actually the opposite of casual Friday. So people will actually dress up on Fridays and put a suit and tie on, just have that little bit of a sense that there was sort of something special happening, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, Lucy, you were saying?
I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? And certainly what we've noticed is that now that all of our clients are working from home, that's been the big difference. And I always moaned about the fact that I traveled so much for my job, but actually I had quite a bit of time for myself in that day, just on the train. And often I would work on the train, but on the tube, I'd just kind of flick through kind of news and play a game, phone a friend when I was in the car. And the first week I was working from home, I did a week before the lockdown because my daughter was ill. And I had a day where I realized at the end of the day, I'd walked 1,800 steps in the day. I had just sat at my computer all day on teleconferences. And that wouldn't be my advice to anybody else, but I hadn't taken that advice myself. And I think for those of us that are facilities experts, it's interesting how we've all had to think, okay, what am I actually telling other people to do while I am on 14 hours a day of meetings? Because that isn't what we recommend about healthy working, is it? Mm-hmm. So I think we've all had to look to ourselves and think, you know, where is that schedule we said we needed? How am I going to go out and do my walk? And I tend to do my walk at the end of the day. I think I've finished work now. and now I will go for a walk, and then I won't look at my laptop again. I will just leave it in the office. I will close it down, and then I'll be doing things, you know, with my kids in the evening and doing things with my friends. And I'm much stricter about that than I was, because as you say, otherwise it never stops.
No. Requires a certain level of self-discipline in order to do these things. All right, let's move on. There's still that options for everybody listening in to and watching to send questions in. Please send your questions in on the right-hand side on the chat function. It says questions there. You can post questions there. If we move on and do also a polling, we'd like to get also the input from our viewers and listeners. So if we can post the first questions and push that out. And then Anita, you've been a part of creating some of these questions. Could you just elaborate a little bit on the question? Let me read it out first. If you're giving the option to work from home after the COVID-19 crisis, would you, and if so, how often? And you can select one of the following: not at all, occasionally, 1 to 2 days a week, 3 to 4 days a week, all the time. Please put your answer in now. And Anita, if you'll give it a little bit of background.
Absolutely, yeah. So no, we've been trying to track whether this whole experience is, you know, whether people are valuing this flexibility and you know, this whole new, you know, blending work and non-work much more, you know, after the COVID than prior. And I think there is a slight bit of reticence too, just given that, you know, everyone's going through quarantines and, you know, stay-at-home orders and all these other things. There's definitely a reticence about going back in at this very time. I mean, that hopefully will subside, you know, in the future. But we're just kind of trying to get a sense of what the long-term implications of this are going to be in terms of people wanting, like they've now gotten a taste of this flexibility. I'll be curious to see the results here, but in our experience, this is exactly what we say. Most people want to do it about 1 to 2 days a week. And I think this becomes a really important issue because formalizing these programs, as you know, Kate alluded to this earlier, you know, 7% or so of the organizations actually, you know, kind of formalize this, you know, for everyone. By formalizing this and understanding that half of your workforce is going to be out 20 to 40% of the time, you can now plan facilities, you can plan space demand, and we also have another 20% that's going to be out even more. So understanding, you know, what the demand is helps you to long-term look at your facilities, because I think part of this whole transition is going to be what happens after COVID for our workspace. We've spent a lot, you know, big emphasis in recent past has been on, you know, meeting spaces and bench seating and close proximity, densifying. You know, is that really going to be the right solution as you start bringing people back in? And so we're starting to look at that, and I think how much people want to continue to do this after the fact helps, you know, obviously give great data for, you know, that kind of space planning even. You know, in addition to planning, you know, how do we formalize and make everyone really effective at working from home?
Right. And if you look at some of this or behind some of these numbers, I mean, are we where we need to be in terms of technology, social readiness, organizational maturity, or are there areas for innovation that you see that needs to be developed more in order to maybe to change some of this these numbers?
I think, you know, from our perspective, we definitely see a wide distribution of maturity within organizations. And I think one of the key innovations coming out of this is going to be how rapidly, you know, organizations can change, right? So in terms of technology, I'll go through the three of those that, you know, that you just mentioned. In terms of the technology, we've got the basic tools. We've got the video, the web collaboration, you know, all the cloud-based, you know, project management and teaming tools and e-filing, you know, that's all there. The issue is adoption and capability within an organization. You know, even with web collaborations, I see it within certain organizations, there might be 5 different tools that people use. So that organization doesn't build the capability to learn that tool, everyone to know it really well, use all the features. You know, so just even tool standardization, capability building on an adoption of what's there. And I actually think also going forward, the whole issue of cybersecurity and information security, that's going to be a big one. Because, you know, in our experience, you know, there's been security protocols in certain organizations around new product launches, new designs. That has actually created a culture of needing to come into the office for that. And we're starting to see that even beyond the high-tech industry, where, you know, because of such security around those ideas, you know, people need to come in. So now how do you deal with that? And how do you extend those elements of security when people can be anywhere?
But can I just interrupt there? Those are the same protocols that you need regardless.
I agree.
People are already working in coffee shops. People are already working internationally, you know, on business. You know, these are the kinds of things that we should have been doing for the last 10 years, regardless of whether you have anybody working at home.
Right, but and now, in what we would have taken the next 10 years on, we've got to now do, you know, in months, weeks, whatever it is. And then in terms of the social element, I think that again, our emphasis has been, you know, collaborative spaces and informal and formal ways of teaming and collaborating. And the big thing now, I think, is going to be, okay, how do we, you know, create that virtual lounge? How do we still introduce those social elements? That's usually our #1 barrier for people really, you know, continuing to work remote and having a great experience working remote, is how do you take that whole connection to a company culture, a company brand, and make people feel that no matter where they are, and even though they're very distributed. So ideas like, you know, maybe like an organizational TV, and you can dial in and you actually see people. That this element of video is a big deal, and we do continue to see a lot of organizations, you know, without the video. Like, they'll do online meetings, but there's been a, you know, kind of a taboo against the video element, and it's very powerful from just a human perspective. And having that and adopting those kinds of practices and using them more to create engagement campaigns, and, you know, like an Earth Day thing. Let's all throw in our ideas about what everyone's doing on Earth Day, just to keep that personal element alive when people are distributed. I think there isn't that readiness, because everyone up till now has, in these organizations, it's all been, you know, very face-to-face. So, you know, in a physical face. So now it's kind of like, okay, how do we transition that? And then thirdly, from your, you know, organizational maturity element, I think that there has been a tendency not to formalize flex programs. Right, so people can do it, you can, you know, be in and out occasionally, but we're really not going to formalize it. And I was mentioning before, it's going to be important to formalize it, to provide some of that structure around, you know, how do you do it right? How do we plan for our spaces? You know, all those elements. And I think that, you know, how do we help managers to manage this way? How do we create the right performance management system so that we, you know, build that trust and accountability? You know, recently, you know, we've been hearing a lot about, you know, experience in the past year or so, how experience is such a big thing, and we now have experience managers and experience directors as roles. I think going forward, we may organizationally start to need roles around kind of that remote experience role, where you start looking at the practices, the spaces, the technology, and how we're really supporting people, you know, across the board, and make sure that remote experience is up to par, so that you don't take a productivity or social collaborative hit.
Thank you. Thanks, Anita. I will move quickly to the next, because we also have a lot of questions coming in. I want to make sure we get some of them. So the next one is, if we can get the next polling question up in Houston. Houston, could you get us, we need some support here. It's not the Houston we have a problem type of thing. It's the Houston we need help. So if you could answer that on here, and then I'll actually pose the question to you, Kate. If you could elaborate a little bit on this and what you expect to see from this, and this is a fairly straight yes and no answer, so we can probably go quickly to the output, the results of this.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that we're trying to tease out of the survey that you mentioned earlier, Peter, is there a correlation between people that had been doing this and success rates now? I'm seeing the numbers come in, 2/3 of people didn't do this before. And so I really expect out of the survey, you know, we're going to see that they didn't have the experience in using the tools. They lacked the training. You've got these questions, you know, did you have, were you comfortable with the following technologies before, you know, and now? So we'll be able to parse that. I also think it's going to be the answers are going to be very different a month or 2 months or 3 months from now. You know, people are working very differently now than they will be if they continue to do this on a regular basis because of many of the things that Anita said.
Right, thanks. And let's go to the third and final polling question, and that's for Lucy. And it's a very, very straightforward, simple question. Are you working from home now, which means today, right now? Yes or no? And Lucy, what do you sort of expect to see from this? I guess based on the COVID-19 situation.
Well, I was quite surprised at the figures coming up in that last poll that 2/3 of people hadn't worked from home previously. I think what we are missing from this COVID-19 situation that we would normally be interested in seeing now is that we're in a really we're in a binary situation that we're looking at now, aren't we? Where you can't go to the office, so you're working from home. And of course, actually, what we are really thinking about nowadays in FM terms is location independent working, where can you work anywhere? And at the moment, people can only work in their homes because they're not allowed to go anywhere else. If I was having a day where I wasn't with clients, I would quite conceivably go and work at a friend's house so that we could work together from a different organisation, but we would work together. If I was in a country where we had more availability of this, I might go to a local shared workspace. Quite often, I'll take my daughter to work and work in a cafe. And that pattern we can't see at the moment. It's home or nothing, isn't it? So anybody who is online at the moment is working, and they're all at home because we're not allowed to go anywhere else. So again, if we come back to that as the kind of origin of the question, this experiment, it's not quite the same experiment that we would have if we said, you're going to work location independent, where would you like to be? And then people might be working from their holiday home or a cafe or working on the train, and all of those patterns we can't see at the moment. So when people are trying this out, they're not trying out the full scope of not being in the office. But I think when we come back to working the way we did before, we've had time to reflect on all sorts of things about life. But one of the things that we're really going to be asking ourselves in a way that is much deeper than we have before is, what is the office for? And I think it's really showing us in a way that we've all theorized about, but this is actually a practical demonstration that the office is not about doing work, it's about collaborating. It's about that face-to-face contact with people. And I think that's going to be reflected much more in behaviors and therefore in design. And I think in the future, you'll see offices with barely any individual workspace because people will do that from home, but much more collaborative space, like the modern offices that we see in the magazines are. But we all know that the magazine offices are not like most people's offices, where it's still people at desks and then there's maybe a sofa in the corner. I think it's going to really trigger that big design change that we've been waiting to see for a long time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thanks. I got a question here from Paula Moore. One concern is that employees don't have proper furniture, especially chairs, as employees are complaining about sitting in kitchens and dining rooms and so on. Have you seen a larger number of work compensation claims because people don't have proper furniture? What are the companies doing to overcome this? And are employees becoming contractors and responsible for handling these things themselves? I don't know who would answer that.
I'll start. Oh,
I actually have recommended to companies, let them take their chair home. It's cheaper than a workers' comp claim. Let them take their dual screens home. You know, I can't work on a single screen. I've got 3 right here, and I still could use another one. I mean, it's false economy. You know, even if that chair doesn't come back, the amount of the productivity that the dual monitors can add to your day completely offsets the cost of having them at home.
Yes, so I think in the UK, some companies have let people take their chairs home, but if you're working in a city like London, that's physically not possible to do. And it's interesting, my sister-in-law works on the legal helpline of a trade union, and we've been confined to our homes for a week, and people are already wanting to make claims like this. And even as a trade union, they have been quite shocked and surprised about that. Yeah. And they have actually said to their members, it is an emergency. And nobody was really prepared for this. And are you sure that you want to do this while your organisation is trying really hard to find ways to keep you employed? But I think in this situation, like all of the other things we've seen with COVID-19, it brings out the best and the worst in people, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen companies do lots of different ways of giving stipends or allowances and different, you know, when you have time to set up. I think companies should come out though and maybe proactively just tell people that we're looking at this, we're gonna, you know, try to set up for this better. You know, organizations have the summer, you know, we don't know what's gonna happen next winter, but they'll have the summer to really come back and get it right. So I think all these issues, just raising that awareness, you know, helps the organization to prepare.
I think Kate's right though. I think the economic case is really clear. In that if you are going to allow people to work from home, you might then say, here is a procurement arrangement we have with this particular kind of chair. And so if you would like one, this is what you do. And the overall cost of doing that is going to be a lot less than trying to deal with claims from people saying that they've injured themselves.
Definitely, yeah.
I have a couple of questions that are based on the same issue on facilities management. One is from Clayton Thomas in Utah. My question is, as facilities professionals, we are of course responsible for buildings. How do you believe this work from home scenario will affect our profession as a whole? And secondly, how does a facilities professional work from home when they're ultimately responsible for buildings and building analytics?
Well, I mean, I'll start out on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think that that a lot of what Lucy alluded to this is going to affect design and planning, definitely. I mean, you're going to deal with different numbers of people coming in and out, and so questions about flexibility. How do we design for flexibility? Density levels. You know, the whole densification, you know, theme that we've been hearing so much about is I don't know that it's going to be accepted as much going forward as it has been in the past. So I think there's a lot of that element of it, and I think that more and more the tools that people use, like all of your, you know, analytics and numbers, all of that's available remotely. So I think when you think of remote work, you know, in a go forward scenario as more of a part-time remote work, just like our survey said, right? Most people want to do this part of the time, not all of the time. There are very few jobs that we've encountered in our research where it can't accommodate at least a part-time, you know, work from home scenario. So I think that blend is what we're going to need to plan for and design for.
Lucy, you've also worked with FM in the UK. I mean, what's your view in terms of how this is changing the FM profession? Is it going to change the FM profession?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've always said that, you know, when no one else is in the building, the FMs are still there looking after the buildings. And I think that while that property portfolio is still in existence, then those buildings will still be used for something. I don't think we'll see buildings just not being used anymore. I think that the way people work is going to change. The balance of what the buildings are for is going to change. If you assume that overall people are still going to be working, there's still going to be roughly the same number of people in the workforce. I think that we've already seen a bit of a change on the high streets of the UK, where so many retailers have gone under. In the town where I live, there are a lot more coffee shops than there used to be. But when you go in those coffee shops, they are full of people working. And so it might be that if you are a facilities manager, you're perhaps managing a different sort of facility in the future. But we certainly have seen that people have got plenty they can get on with from home. And think, you know, all those things that FMs don't like to do and never have time to do because they're always too busy rushing around. I'm running a few tenders for clients at the moment, and all of the kind of background information that I need around specifications, I know that it'll be easier for my clients to do that now because they haven't got the kind of excuses saying, oh, no, I couldn't do it because I was rushing around doing this. They're at home, and I'm saying, perfect. Now you can sit down and do all of that writing around your KPIs and SLAs that you always say you haven't got time to do. So perhaps compliance and documentation and that sort of thing might be a bit tidier.
Right. Kate, I will cut you off, but I have a closing question, which if you could answer very shortly, but I will start with Kate from Sapna Chopra. With this new normal style, what are your thoughts on hot desking, open space, curated workspace design? Does it stand obsolete? If we'll use that to wrap up, and then we'll close the session. From if you could start, Kate, with your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think any single type of space is a mistake. People want choice, including the choice of working remotely, but they want choice within the office too. And this, we've seen this trend, you know, coming on for 10 years. So I've even seen cases where they go to a pretty significant work from home program, but don't reduce the footprint. They change the footprint. So those spaces are becoming more collaborative. You've got team rooms. You've got, you know, maybe some private areas, pods, rooms for large meetings, small meetings, places for, you know, teams to get together and sort of own their neighborhood. So I think that this will accelerate that trend. You know, open office, everybody likes to throw darts at it, but as part of an overall scheme in activity-based working, it has a place in some companies.
Yeah.
Thanks. Any other views or comments on that? Short, very short.
Yeah. I mean, I agree completely with what Kate was saying, that people, that this choice is going to be a really important thing going forward. I think once people have a taste of that, I think it's going to be hard for organizations that haven't done it in the past to say, okay, we're not going to do it going forward. And I just think that maybe some of those allocations might change in terms of how much collaborative, you know, and all that, because a lot of the individual work is now going to be probably done offsite, if, you know, if given the choice to work from home. And so once you come in, the demand is more for those community spaces, group spaces. So that whole allocation of what is in that building when you come in becomes very, very different.
Thank you. All right. We're wrapping up. So before we close, I just want to do a quick plug for the Global Work from Home Experience Survey managed by the WE community. Anita, if you'll tee that up.
Yeah, and so just so you know, we through the Workplace Evolutionaries, we are doing a global survey to gather as much data about the impact of COVID-19 as we can. We're looking at participation levels, expected participation, benefits and barriers, and we think this is going to just provide some really critical insights at a really important time in the workplace. So we are collecting data now. This survey is open. If you could go to the next page. This is where you can find it. If you've got a QR reader, you can clip this and it'll take you to the survey. There's more information on the IFMA website, and these results are going to be made available via your reports and webinars like we're doing here, hopefully starting next month once we have the data we need. And we do want everyone to know that if you would like to administer this within your organization, that's a definite option. You're willing to take this link and have your employees fill it out, or if you are interested in any individual reports, we can give you a custom link. But we're really looking to build this data to, you know, as much as we can to get the most reliable, you know, reading on the results.
Thanks. And I just want to reiterate, because I think this is important, all the results from this will be shared freely. So every output of this is available to everybody.
Yes.
Thank you, Anita, and thanks to the entire panel for all your input and answers and expert knowledge. Also, thanks to all of the participants for your questions and input and participating in our polls. We did not have time to answer all the questions. We will see if we can answer some of them as part of the outcome of this. Please follow IFMA and the WE community online for more information on this and related topics. And also visit the IFMA Coronavirus Responsiveness Resource Center at ifma.org. Next Wednesday, we will continue with the IFMA COVID-19 webinar series. So please watch this space as we communicate theme, timing, and speakers very, very soon. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay home. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.